Assalamu alaikum and a very good evening to our viewers. Welcome to Urgent Spotlight. My name is Azrul Khalib. This is a series of online talk shows where we will be covering how the various policies related to the COVID-19 period, such as the Movement Control Order, have impacted today's urgent issues related to women, workers' welfare, the urban poor, refugees, education, indigenous people, migrants, and of course, healthcare. The agenda for Urgent Spotlight is policy reform and holding the government accountable. We are broadcasting live every Tuesday and Thursday at 8:30 p.m. via the CSOP4R Facebook page. To kick off the very first session tonight, we will be talking about a very hot topic, which is currently being discussed on social media, on the mainstream media, and around coffee tables, of course, with social distancing, which is about migrants, contributors, victims, or troublemakers. Over the past few weeks, we have been seeing an increased volume of angry rhetoric and expressions of hate and xenophobia towards the migrant population in Malaysia. Unfortunately, this is a repeat and very familiar occurrence. But recently, major immigration enforcement operations have taken advantage of enhanced lockdowns aimed to screen for COVID-19 in areas such as Masjid Jami', the Selayang Wholesale Market, and Menara City 1, which has led to thousands of migrants, including those with young children, to be arrested and detained. The government has said that it has done nothing wrong, that its actions are justified. To discuss this and some of the many other issues affecting the migrant population in Malaysia, we have with us this evening Dato Sri M. Ramachelvam, who is a member of the Bar Council's Migrants, Refugees and Immigration Affairs Committee. He is a distinguished and prominent member of the law fraternity who has been part of the Bar Council's task force on the Independent Police Complaints and Misconduct Commission, or IPCMC. He is a founding member of the National Human Rights Society, or HAKAM, and is a member of the Lawyers Beyond Borders Network. He is connecting with us this evening from Pahang. Welcome, Dato Sri.
Thank you, Azrul, for having me on.
You're certainly welcome, Dato Sri. So let's start off by assuming that our viewers out there, those who are watching us this evening, don't know the basics. So we've heard a lot of terms being bandied about in the media. So what can you tell us? What is a migrant, illegal migrant, and documented migrant? How many are there estimated to be in Malaysia? Does this include blue collar or white collar? And where are they living and working among us? Let's start off with these questions first. Dato Sri, go ahead.
Azrul, the term migrant worker, according to the UN Convention on the Protection of the Rights of Migrant Workers and Members of their Family in 1990, refers to any person who is engaged or has been engaged in a state of which he or she is not a national. That is the reference to migrant workers. Illegal migrants, or parti, the Malaysian term that is commonly used, pendatang tanpa izin, refers to a person who entered the country without a valid visa or does not have a valid visa to reside in the country. It also, in the Malaysian context, refers to persons staying on in Malaysia after the expiry of their visa to come into the country, either as a worker, tourist, student, and so on and so forth. So the party has got a very generic term, is a very generic term in Malaysia to refer to almost every undocumented person, whether they came through regular channels or irregular channels, but the right to stay through the regular channel, visit pass is expired, or so on and so forth. Documented migrants, of course, are those who have come in through one of those valid passes that is issued by immigration. There are several passes. You have the visit pass as a tourist, visit pass temporary employment, which is what most of the migrant workers come in. You have, of course, the tourist pass, the transit pass, student pass, landing pass, and so on and so forth. So these are several passes. There is also the special pass that gives you the right to stay on a temporary basis. So those are generally if you come into Malaysia, if you are a foreigner, you need to come in under one of these passes. The bulk of the migrant workers actually come under what is called visit pass temporary employment. So in the Malay nomenclature is of course PKLS. PLKS, Pas Lawatan Kerja Sementara, yeah. As far as the numbers of migrants in Malaysia are concerned, we have officially about 2 million documented migrants or migrant workers in our country. These are people who have this valid PLKS or work permits to stay and work in the various permitted sectors in Malaysia. There are 6 permitted sectors in Malaysia. That is for migrant workers: manufacturing, agriculture, construction, plantation, services with their own conditions. There are several services you could work. There are services you cannot work. And of course, the other sector is the sector of domestic workers.
So when we're talking about migrant workers, it would also encompass both blue and white collar workers.
That is so. The white collar workers there are 3 categories, or rather the expatriates, what one refers as expatriates. Okay. Those are those with specialized skills and earning more than 10,000. So that is the expatriate pass 1. Then you have expatriate pass 2. That is people who are the skilled workers who earn between 5 to 10,000. Then there is one other category as well, EP3 they call it, expatriate pass 3, those with skills whose wages range from 3 to 5,000.
So, Dato Sri, we've heard a lot about the numbers of people living here and working in Malaysia who are amongst the migrant population, and you just said 2 million, but we've also heard 3 million, which includes those who are undocumented. And when you think about it, that's already almost 10% of the Malaysian population. So where are they? Where are they living and working?
Okay, this is a very interesting area, Azrul. You see, the best that we have is actually guesstimates as far as the undocumented workers are concerned. We have, at the very minimum, the most conservative estimate for undocumented workers, that is those who have come through irregular channels, either through our land or sea borders and not through the regular immigration channels, those whose permits have expired for whatever reason. There are a myriad of reasons. It could have been deception by the recruiters, people who were brought in under tourist visa whilst they were promised a work visa, people who have dispute with the employers, people who have absconded, and so on and so forth. So the numbers are at the very minimum 1.5 million to as high as 4 million. So if you take the migrant worker population on the outside numbers of 4 million, and some even say higher than 4 million, then you're talking about a total migrant population of something like 6 million or thereabouts, which would actually be the 3rd largest community in Malaysia. Even without those numbers, they are still the 3rd largest community.
So we know the numbers of migrant workers. We know that they're coming here, whether it's through legal or undocumented means. We have a certain idea as to where they are located. They're located in our cities, in some of the villages, in the rural areas, and so forth. But what are some of the countries that they are coming from? You haven't mentioned yet which countries originating countries these migrant workers are coming from?
Okay, the countries of origin, the largest bulk of our migrant worker population, almost nearing to something like 37% or thereabouts, are Indonesians because of the proximity. So our largest migrant worker population is Indonesian. And the second largest population, you'll be actually surprised, are Nepalis.
And where are
Nepalis,
they working? In the security sector, clerical work, sanitation? Where are they working?
the Nepalis generally are involved in the security industry because according to our laws, if you want to employ people in as guards, security guards, and so on and so forth, you have to have only Nepalis are allowed. The other area where you have a lot of Nepalis are actually in the manufacturing sectors. So quite a lot of factories actually employ Nepali workers. So you have a huge population of Nepalis here. They estimate for Nepalis is about something like 500,000 documented and another 500,000 undocumented. The third largest community are the Bangladeshis. Then comes the Indian migrant workers, and then the Myanmar migrant workers, and so on and so forth.
Okay, so Dato Sri, and I just want to make a quick shout out to our viewers this evening. If you have any questions that you would like to ask Dato Sri, please do send them over via the Facebook Live broadcast in the function there, and we will try to get those questions answered through this show. So, Dato Sri, most of the times we hear and understand and we know that migrants are working in jobs which are 3D. They're considered dirty, dangerous, and difficult. So they're often in construction, plantations, sanitation sectors, and it requires a lot of manual labor. So is it correct to say that there are fewer Malaysians today who are willing to do these jobs? Are migrants actually filling gaps or playing roles which are in competition with Malaysians for these jobs?
Okay, it is 3Ds, that dirty, dangerous, difficult, as well as demeaning sectors of the economy where the migrant workers work. There are very few Malaysian workers who would want to do work in these sectors. This is a fact. We find that in the construction sector or the plantation sector or the cleaning and sanitation sectors, there's very few Malaysians who do want to work in those sectors. And employers really have a problem recruiting migrant workers for these sectors. Therefore, the migrant workers are definitely feeling the gaps in employment in these sectors. If there are no migrant workers working in these sectors, we are going to have a serious problem filling workers in these sectors. Construction, for instance, plantation, for instance, would be crippled in its entirety if there are no migrant workers. Huge swathes of the manufacturing sector will also be crippled.
But Dato Sri, the government today is saying that today, with so many migrant workers that are being detained, arrested during the immigration raids that are happening, they're saying that Malaysians can easily fill up these jobs that are being left vacant by these migrant workers. I mean, isn't the government correct in saying so?
You see, it's interesting to note that, in fact, there is a World Bank study which was done together with ILMIA, which is our think tank on employment under the Ministry of Human Resources, that actually proves that Malaysians are not interested to work in these sectors. One.
There's no competition, really.
No competition because you are merely filling the gap. The other area, Azrul, which is very interesting to take note, as the topic says, are they contributors otherwise, is this. this study which I said, the World Bank together with Ilmiah study, shows that for every 1,000 migrants who are employed in Malaysia, it creates something like 836 employment opportunities for Malaysians, full-time employment opportunities, and 169 part-time employment opportunities. Because Malaysians would then be able to work on the higher
Scale
sectors of the
of the
economy, yes,
employment. Yeah.
rather than being stuck with the low-skill employment.
So there's this Khazanah Research Institute supplementary to its 2018 State of the Household Report, which actually concluded that there is insufficient evidence to show that an increase in the growth of foreign worker employment could actually lead to a lower growth of native worker employment. So it's not a zero-sum game like it's being said very often in the popular media. But let me go to rights, because rights is a very tricky topic whenever we hear about, how people are being treated, but also what they are entitled to. So let me ask you, what kind of rights are migrant workers entitled to when they come to Malaysia? Is it the same as Malaysian workers? What about healthcare benefits and workplace protection? Doesn't everyone have the right to health, or is it conditional? Because right now we have a situation where those who are being detained, do they have actual access to recourse or justice? What can we do to ensure that they do?
Okay, there are several parts to this issue. Azrul, your first part is, are migrant workers entitled to the same rights as Malaysian workers? Generally, they do. They are entitled to the same protections that Malaysian workers have within our laws, within the Employment Act. Most of those provisions do apply. However, there are some differences in terms of the levels of protection. And coming to the issue of the day, the issue of retrenchment, which is going to be a real issue in the Malaysian economy, for Malaysian workers, for migrant workers, and so on and so forth. Because, many jobs would evaporate as a result of this pandemic and so on and so forth, as a consequence of this. So when it comes to retrenchment, the last in, first out principle does not apply to migrant workers. So it is all migrant workers out first. And then when it comes to Malaysian workers, then the last in, first out principle applies. There are certain other areas where the protections are lesser. For instance, they do not come within the EPF scheme. They are not entitled to the pension scheme under CSOP4R. Their workplace coverage, there's only workplace coverage. There is no coverage for accidents outside the workplace, for payment of their hospital bills and so on and so forth. That is one area. The other area that you come on and you touched on is very, very important, the whole issue of healthcare costs. Migrant workers or any migrant in Malaysia is actually charged the full healthcare costs. A normal Malaysian, if he has a bill of 500, for a migrant that bill would translate to something like 10 to 15,000. That is what they are charged for, the full cost of medication. And they do not have access to pay that except through their foreign workers health insurance scheme, which again has got a limit on the amount which they can claim. That is only for hospitalization. So if it is non-hospitalization, that scheme does not pay. So these are certain areas that there is difference. And of course, there is no right to unionize migrant workers per se. They have no right to lead trade unions and so on and so forth. One particular area when you're talking about protections, rights, equality, and so on and so forth, that the Malaysian legal system does not protect are domestic workers, those who are called household workers or domestic workers. There is no protection whatsoever, even if you are a Malaysian domestic worker or a migrant domestic worker. So these are the gaps.
So what you're describing basically is a conditional set of parameters which allows for migrant workers who are, in this case, we're talking about documented migrant workers who are able to access a certain amount of rights and entitlements under the conditions of work here in Malaysia. But does that mean then, if you're undocumented, you have no access at all? I mean, today we're seeing some humanitarian conditions emerging from the EMCOs, where people who are trapped in these restricted zones expected to be given assistance by their respective governments of which they belong to. But if they're undocumented, then there's no way for them to be able to really get that kind of assistance. So it's problematic, isn't it? I mean, right now, if you're documented, you have this, but even then it's conditional. But if you're undocumented, you might have been left out. So what can we expect from the Malaysian public to help out when it comes to migrant workers?
Okay, you raised a very, very important issue. Probably one of the most important issues in Malaysia today, the whole issue of undocumented workers. As we have seen earlier, the numbers guesstimates, they go from 1.5 million to 4 million. Some even say a much higher number. This group of people have totally no rights whatsoever. They have no legal rights within the Malaysian legal framework, the Malaysian official framework. There is no policy whatsoever. The only policy that they've had thus far is arrest and deport. Previously, there were amnesty and regularization programs. There was a program which ended sometime, which started in 2017, ended in 2018, which actually something like 800,000 undocumented workers came forward to be regularized, out of which about 50% of them got regularized. So that is the numbers we have. It's
So,
a million plus.
we're talking about huge numbers of both documented and undocumented migrant workers who are affected during this period of the COVID-19 crisis, and they are needing help just as much as everybody else. So, do you think that when it comes to migrant workers, they should be given free healthcare services, similar to what's accessed by citizens? Because in I think Portugal, they did that. They extended the same kind of healthcare benefits, because in a public health emergency, you can't differentiate between national and non-national. It's a crisis. Should we be doing the same thing here in Malaysia?
You're right. Portugal has done it. Qatar has done it. And I think most jurisdictions have taken the position that when we face a health crisis, a pandemic of this nature, we cannot be looking at their status. That is also the position taken by the United Nations Malaysia chapter. That is also the, I think, position taken by the WHO representative for Malaysia, the Bar Council, the various civil society organizations have all come out to say that in a health pandemic, you cannot look at the immigration status of the person. If you start looking at the immigration status of the person, that person is not going to come out to be tested. When that person does not come out to be tested, then he even if he has symptoms, and even if you offer them, okay, we'll give you free healthcare, testing and screening, but after that, we are going to arrest and deport you, nobody is going to come forward. They would become, a risk to everyone. So the general public would be at a risk with this kind of a policy. This is a regressive policy. This policy has to be stopped immediately.
But Dato Sri, right now, the immigration authorities are conducting enforcement activities which are taking advantage of the EMCO and the MCO previously. But at the very start of this MCO, I remember that the government had given assurance in the name of public health that no enforcement action would be taken during this public health emergency to ensure that this particular marginalized and hidden population could actually be screened for COVID-19 and treated. Yet today, that seems to have changed. Isn't the fact that that many of them are undocumented make the actions by the authorities justifiable? Because they're undocumented, they therefore need to be, taken care of, and in this case, being detained and identified, screened. I mean, is that even ethical? What is being done today by the authorities?
Okay, there has been a lot of flip-flops and varying different statements coming out from the authorities. The policy by the Ministry of Health, I think, is the best policy. They have come out clearly to state this, that they will screen, they will test any person who needs to be screened and tested according to their SOPs, targeted testing, and so on and so forth. And they have done so, and they said they would not be checking on the issue of status, immigration status of persons. However, there was this statement by the Minister of Defense who said that they would not look at immigration status of persons who are screened, but he had a caveat there, to be fair to him. His caveat being those from the Tabligh cluster. He had said those who were, or those linked to the Tabligh cluster. So that was.
So he wasn't really talking about migrant workers in general. He was just talking within the context of the Tabligh cluster.
And those connected with the Tabligh cluster. To be fair to him, that is what he said. The IGP then goes and says, we are handling, we are detaining and deporting them to handle, to overcome the COVID-19 problem. You see, the issue here is this. People are going to go underground. People are going to hide. People are not going to come out to be tested. Everybody needs who needs to be tested or who is part of a target group, and this is a vulnerable group which, by the very nature, they cannot practice social distancing because of their cramped living conditions, the kind of housing, accommodation issues that they have, sanitation issues that they have. We've seen the biggest part of the COVID-19 clusters in Singapore is amongst the migrant workers. And
exactly
undocumented migrant workers.
Definitely, Dato. I think we can take a leaf out of the lessons that are being learned by Singapore itself, which is struggling with the conditions in which, even in Singapore, it's vulnerable enough to actually result in the spread of the disease amongst this community. But it's not because they're migrant workers, but because of the conditions that they're living in, which makes them vulnerable. But let me ask you, let's move to a really important point in this whole discussions concerning migrant workers. And this goes to a question that's being asked online. Why is there so much anger and hate and xenophobic expression towards migrant workers in Malaysia? I highlighted at the very beginning of this discussion of how much of an important role that they play in the Malaysian economy, how indispensable that they are, and most importantly, they are contributing to the building of this country. Yet there is so much anger and there's quite a lot of hate out there aimed at this vulnerable population as you describe it. So where is this coming from?
You see, it's quite baffling, really, this whole issue of the anti-migrant sentiment, the anti-Rohingya sentiment that's being whipped up, especially during this lockdown period. I think a lot of it has got to do with people's perception that these are people who are, the other. The other, and they are responsible for spreading COVID-19 and so on and so forth. There are even leaders of our government. There's a minister who even went on to say that these are people who are dirty, they live in dirty conditions, unsanitary conditions. We need to get rid of them, the kind of things. So there's a lot of xenophobia and hatred being spread about. migrant workers and refugees and asylum seekers and so on and so forth in our society. And there is, of course, these elements are being fanned by what do you call the online media and parts of the mainstream media as well. It's always the fear of the other, and then the laying of the blame on the other. That's what's happening with no empirical evidence whatsoever. The
It
numbers
it
as
does
far
start
is very.
feeling that way, doesn't it, Dato Sri? It certainly does feel that way, that because we are all feeling very vulnerable right now and we need to lash out and be angry at someone, and we pick on these vulnerable groups to sort of blame for what's happening to us right now. And we we have unemployment that's going up right now as a result of the MCO being imposed, and suddenly we're finding someone that we need to blame for some of our troubles, anxiety, and worries. And we've picked the migrant worker population. But let me ask you, Dato Sri, what can we do better? How can we address this point? Because this is going to last beyond the MCO. It's going to be continuous throughout, even after COVID-19 is less of a priority. So how are we going to address this problem of hate and anger and xenophobia towards the migrant population?
First and foremost, those in authority with the power have to take the steps that are required. They have to come down and tell the people that this is not on. The rule of law has to be implemented. If there is hate speech, then there is hate speech. Action needs to be taken. There's a lot of fake news, and I don't like usage of the fake news law, but what needs to be done is this has to be countered. Like, for instance, the whole issue surrounding the Rohingya issue, all these fake claims of matters attributed to them. Similarly, matters attributed to the migrant community, that they are snatching jobs and so on and so forth. And you are building a narrative that is anti-migrant when you need the migrants. The migrants do contribute to society very well. You have cited the Kazana study, which says statistically it's insignificant as far as migrants taking away jobs from locals. And migrants are doing jobs that locals don't want to do. And migrants actually prop up major sectors of our national economy. These are the positives. We need leaders across, be it political leaders, religious leaders, civil society leaders, to come out and say the right things, not fan the flames of bigotry, not fan the flames of hatred and
Mhm.
xenophobia in our society.
So, Dato Sri, we have a question. Should and can action be taken against employers who have abandoned their documented migrant workers and leaving it to the government to deal with them and even to prevent infection from COVID-19? We have a lot of cases now that employers are just, abandoning what they are now considering as liabilities.
Yes, of course, employers have their duties and obligations to migrant workers as per their contracts with those workers. Those documented migrant workers would have standard employment contracts that are vetted by the government and the ministry. So if there are any employers who are abandoning migrant workers, they should approach the Labor Department, or they should approach one of the civil societies, or they can even approach the Bar Council Legal Aid Center to request for assistance, and we would
Oh,
assist them to access justice, so to speak.
that's good to know because there is a need for legal recourse, especially in these very perilous times. You were talking a little bit about how reforms could be introduced into how we look at migrant worker issues. There was a report of independent committee on reforming this sector. I mean, what happened to the report?
That's an interesting issue. I did sit on that committee as a member of that committee. We had consultations throughout the country, town hall meetings, We also had stakeholder consultations with employers, migrant groups, with CSOs and so on and so forth, with refugee groups and all that. And at the end of the day, we had come out with a comprehensive report with various recommendations, and many of those issues that we have handled are the very issues that we have been talking about today. Issues about how to resolve the problem of undocumented migrants, issues of how to resolve the problem faced by employers in recruiting migrant workers, the cost, the prohibitive cost that migrant workers pay for recruitment, the payment by those service providers, the extortionate payment, some even say. All this has been done, recommendations have been made. They have been actually given to the
Is the
government.
report public?
No, that's where I'm coming to. Our last recommendation of the core recommendations in that report is for the report to be made public. We have actually presented to the Cabinet Committee on Foreign Workers. We have actually presented and made an oral presentation to the full Malaysian Cabinet on the 22nd of May 2019. Cabinet is still deliberating, the then Cabinet. Now there's a new Cabinet. I'm sure the new Cabinet has not had a look. The former government said that they will look at the report and they will implement the recommendations. To answer you, but nothing has been done, to be fair.
Okay.
Nothing much has been done. To answer your question directly, the report is still embargoed by the government of Malaysia.
Okay, but the good thing is we know what needs to be reformed. We know where the strengths and weaknesses and gaps are, and they're contained in this report, which gives us some hope that changes can be made and introduced into the existing system because they're being exposed during this crisis that we're having right now. Dato Sri, we're coming to the end of this evening's show. So very quickly, 1 minute or 30 seconds, last message you want to send to our viewers this evening.
My only request to all Malaysians is to always remember this, that migrant workers are workers. They are not commodities. They are human beings. We should treat all workers with respect, including migrant workers. These are people who have left their home countries to come and work for us, to work in our industries, to work in our restaurants, to work in our homes. They provide an invaluable service to all of us. I think if one reflects, can we for a moment live a day of our lives without a migrant worker doing something for us? You know, at the restaurant we go to, at our homes, looking after our families, our children, you know, in the various sectors of the economy, you know, from giving us a haircut to so many daily things which we have taken for granted. And quite a number of them are actually undocumented as well. So spare thought. I think what government needs to do is to come out with a moratorium on the arrest and detention of migrants during this pandemic period, and thereafter institute a proper policy of amnesty and regularization for these undocumented migrant workers. For the rest of the migrant workers, I think it is important, it is imperative, we as Malaysians treat them as human beings, as people with families who have come to assist their families back home. We should not look down upon them. We should always, as I said, treat them as human beings. That's all.
I think that's excellent, Dato Sri. Compassion and dignity should govern our actions when it comes to this issue. Thank you, Dato Sri Ramachelvam, for being our guest for our inaugural broadcast. Ladies and gentlemen, that ends this evening's segment discussing on how recent events have affected migrant worker issues. Please tune in to this Thursday's Bahasa broadcast at the same time, where we will continue the conversation regarding migrant worker issues. Title of that forum will be Pekerja Asing, Penyumbang, Mangsa atau Pengacau di Malaysia. With that, thank you and good night. This is Azrul Khalib signing off.